Hi, it's December 18th, 2007. Welcome back. This is Rob Bryanton from the Imagining the 10th Dimension video blog. And in honor of the holiday season, I thought today's entry should be something a little more befitting these times. So it's called The End of the World, Death, and the 10th Dimension. And before we get into the text part, I just wanted to start with a song. This is one of the 26 songs from the book Imagining the 10th Dimension. This one's called The End of the World.
The end of the world, oft predicted, never realized. The end of the world, never hear it's such a surprise. How could millions be so wrong? The end of the world, the end of the world has already been, it's come and gone. Looking back through history, we often encounter prophecies of end times so very, very near. Next year, 5 years, 10 from now, a state of flux, some way, somehow. The process of postponement never clear. The end of the world, are predicted, never realized. The end of the world, never hear it's such a surprise. How could millions be so wrong? The end of the world, the end of the world has already been, it's come and gone. With space and time a continuum of everything there is to come, and might have been in one infinite ball. Multiple timelines now I see, apocalyptic destinies, prophets proving prophets after all. The saucers already landed, our star bodies already attained. Y2K, the global pandemic, huge disasters, the big freaking asteroid destroyed the world. The end of the world, oft predicted, never realized. The end of the world, never hear it's such a surprise. How could millions be so wrong? The end of the world, the end of the world has already been, it's come and gone. The end of the world has come and gone.
20 years ago, I was writing the music for a play about the end of the world. Placed 20,000 years in the future, it was probably ahead of its time. Its premise was that our ongoing environmental abuses had destroyed all plant and animal life and made our planet so unstable that the last remaining inhabitants were being forced to leave the Earth forever. Let's think back to 20 years ago. The 80s, quite frankly, were not a real great decade for environmental consciousness. The Me decade, as it's sometimes called, was looking back at the horrific environmental warnings of the 60s and 70s and saying, "Look, nothing happened, we're all fine, relax." This got me thinking that no matter what time in history you're looking at, there's always been a small contingent waving their arms and saying, "The end is nigh." In the 80s, trying to get the audience to imagine that the end was coming as a result of our pollution of the environment seemed to me to have some difficulties. But eventually, I reasoned, there's going to have to be a time when one of those end-of-the-world predictions come true, whether that be tomorrow or 20,000 years from now. Was there a way, I wondered, to make those predictions seem more real to the audience right now? I should mention here that, as I describe in my book, I'd been pondering the ideas of branching timelines and important cusps that each of us experience as far back as the age of 7, and a wonderfully subversive book by Madeleine L'Engle called A Wrinkle in Time that I read a number of times as a child definitely had already caused these ideas to have started brewing years before. I should also mention here that I was really worrying about things that were none of my business. I was the composer, and the playwright creating the text for this project had already come up with a story rich in metaphor and texture, but there was still something about the environmental catastrophe angle that, for me, seemed to need a little bit more help, so I kept thinking. This is when the way of imagining reality that became the 10th Dimension project first occurred to me. The first 3 dimensions are easy. Think of a line. That's the first dimension. Draw a second line that crosses the first. That's the second dimension. Bend those lines and you're in the 3rd dimension. I was reading an article about quantum physics and trying to imagine how our reality could be so strange. Down at the quantum level, everything is a wave until it's observed, at which point its wave function is collapsed into one state or another. How, I asked myself, can the act of observation be what causes subatomic particles to stop being waves? It was just too weird. The way I decided to explain it to myself then was that this must mean that those waves exist in the 5th dimension and that it is us moving down our 4D line of time, picking one part of the waveform out from the other, that gives us the quantum observer effect. But what, I asked myself, if this was also happening not just at the quantum level, but also within our physical reality of space-time? If we think of our timeline as being in the 4th dimension, then that would mean that there are other parts of the 5th dimension where end-of-the-world predictions had already come true, and that if you wanted to get to those other timelines, you would have to jump through the 6th dimension to get there. I remember sitting in a coffee shop with the playwright, excitedly drawing little diagrams of lines and branches on a napkin and showing how you could fold the napkin to jump from one reality to another. This, I said to him, is how you can explain how the end of the world is constantly coming. Because if it had already come, we wouldn't be around anymore to ask why those end of the world predictions never seem to come true. This would mean, I reasoned, that at the end of the play, the characters were waiting to be rescued by someone from one of those other realities where the end of the world hadn't happened yet. Someplace out there in the 5th or 6th dimension. And the clincher for me was that once we got to the 7th dimension, that was as far as I could imagine, and the fact that so many spiritual and mystical systems also assigned a special significance to the number 7 seemed to add to the impact of what I was imagining. Now, I'll be the first to admit that I may not have explained these ideas back then as well as I could have, but the upshot is that the playwright looked at me like I was crazy, and the conversation was dropped. So, 20 years ago, I was a guy with an unusual idea about a way to imagine how our reality is constructed out in the middle of the Canadian prairies, and that was where the idea and I stayed. Over the following 2 decades, I showed these concepts to a number of other people, trying to get them interested in working on projects that explored these ideas. Some people seemed to get what I was talking about, but there were also quite a number who gave me that "you're crazy" look. Still, for me, the idea never went away, and about 5 years ago, I decided to write some songs about the ramifications of all this. Let's just say my obsession was still strong because in my spare time I ended up writing over 40 songs in about 2 months surrounding the ideas that sprang to me from this way of imagining reality. In the back of my mind, I was planning that someday these songs would end up on a CD with a little booklet explaining the ideas. As it turns out, that CD project ended up flipped on its head because I ended up with a 220-page book about these ideas, and the lyrics to 26 of the songs I wrote back then are printed at the end of the book. Okay, so let's move on from the cheery topic of the end of the world to talk about death. And here again is one of the 26 songs from this project about different ramifications of these ways of thinking about reality. This song is called "Now I Lay Me Down to Sleep."
Continues flowing on, the past into tomorrow. unsaid, so much left to do. So what am I so afraid of? Not this is it. Did I try my best to be the person I intended? It's not the end of the road. It's not the end of the dream. It's just the end of a chapter. Turn the page and move on. Yeah, yeah, now I lay me down to sleep, to rest my weary head. If I should die in slumber deep, remember what I said.
4 years ago, I almost died. I went in for routine laparoscopic surgery to have my gallbladder removed, and the surgeon accidentally sliced open a large vein on my liver. My entire chest cavity quickly filled with blood, making it impossible for them to see exactly where the bleeding was coming from, so they jammed some packing into the general area and closed me up. I woke up the next day blown up like a large balloon with almost half of my blood not flowing in my veins, but pooled in my chest and gut. The surgeon explained that this was the best option because the blood was pressing on my vital organs from the outside, and that if they drained the blood off, my blood pressure would have dropped to the point where I probably would have gone into shock and died. The internal bleeding took several days to stop completely, and it took almost 3 months before all of that blood in my gut had been absorbed back into my system, and I stopped looking and feeling like I was very pregnant. So there I was, lying in the hospital with my family putting on a brave face for me, but knowing how close it had been. Within a day or two of this disaster, my eldest son was at my bedside, and I again started trying to tell him about this way of imagining reality. Although he didn't give me the "you're crazy" look, bless him for that, he did confess later on that he presumed this was just the ravings of a man stoned on morphine. But that's not where our story about death ends. About 2.5 years ago, I went on a trip to Australia. Up to that point in my adult life, I'd been reading mostly science fiction novels and Stephen King thrillers for my entertainment, and of course the never-ending stream of equipment manuals I was constantly pouring through as part of my day job as a composer and studio owner. But it was around this time that I decided to start reading more serious science books, and that's why the light reading I took with me to Australia was by physicist Michio Kaku, an eye-opening book called Hyperspace, a scientific odyssey through parallel universes, time warps, and the 10th dimension. Now, some people will tell you that my way of imagining reality is not the one that's currently taught in physics classes. But what kept happening for me as I read Kaku's book was that I could see ways that string theory and cosmology could quite easily be pasted onto what I had been thinking. More importantly, what that book showed me is that my way of imagining didn't go far enough, because it only accounted for the universe we live in, as a point in the 7th dimension. What, I reasoned, if the other universes Kaku was talking about were other points in the 7th dimension? My immediate inspiration was that this meant that the line, branch, fold pattern I had already imagined to get to the 7th dimension could be repeated a third time, leaving us with absolutely every possible expression of reality up there within the 10th dimension. But we're still talking about death here, so on my way back from Australia, I developed blood clots in my legs, a not uncommon problem from sitting too long on the plane, which gradually migrated to my lungs. Feeling increasingly weak and short of breath in the weeks that followed, I finally got to the point where I couldn't even fall asleep because I kept having to gasp for breath, and I ended up in the hospital's cardiac surveillance ward for almost 2 weeks, hooked up to heart monitors in that lovely oxygen tube. For someone looking for a 2-week holiday, I highly recommend the cardiac surveillance ward. Just make sure you're not in there with anything actually wrong with your heart. The nurses are friendly and work very hard to keep you calm and peaceful. The beds are comfortable, and once the blood thinners they put me on started to work and the clots in my lungs started to clear, I actually felt pretty good. So there I was, with this recent insight about how my way of imagining reality could interface with leading-edge theories about cosmology and the higher dimensions. I had my wife Gail bring in my laptop, and during my 2-week stay in the hospital, I wrote the first draft of my book. I've been asked more than once what drugs I was taking when I wrote all my unusual ideas down. Lots of people still think I'm kidding when I tell them I was on oxygen. During the following year, I took that 90-page draft I'd written in the hospital and did a lot more reading about physics and cosmology. I was thrilled to discover that my way of blending quantum waves and branching timelines from 20 years before was in fact a real and recognized scientific theory, first advanced by Hugh Everett III, and it was commonly known as the many worlds interpretation of quantum physics. Everett went to his grave in 1982 largely unrecognized for the significance of his work, but over the past 10 years or so, his theory has been increasingly embraced by the modern physics community. And while I was adding all this research into my book, I also created the audio soundtrack for an 11-minute animation I was envisioning. For an 11-minute animation I was envisioning that would more clearly illustrate those concepts I'd been drawing on napkins in coffee shops 20 years before. The talented folks at O Media here in Regina, Saskatchewan, Canada, worked with me to create the visuals, which are seen in the book and the animation, and in the accompanying website, which was launched at the end of June 2006. Within a few days, the website vaulted to popularity, and this project became known all over the world. If anything, the project continues to gradually become more popular now because of the growing fascination people are having with the middle ground I'm trying to portray, a place where science and spirituality, physics and metaphysics can be shown to all be talking about the same thing. The website is currently getting 2 million hits a month, and my little book, written as I lay in a hospital bed wondering if my heart was about to do me in, has been sold all over the world. Why has this project been so popular? Because it isn't just about physics, it's about creativity and inspiration and souls and memes, which are ideas that can be transmitted across time and space. It's about the place where information equals reality, a quantum physics idea that applies to many other things, which in our modern accelerated world of information means people with shared beliefs are connecting to each other more quickly than ever before. And with the increasing fascination these days over the Mayan calendar's predictions of the end of time happening in 2012, and futurists like Ray Kurzweil predicting a rapidly approaching singularity where humans and technology merge, the fact that this project began as a way of thinking about the end of the world adds new resonance. But to be clear, both Kurzweil and promoters of the Mayan calendar are not talking about an apocalypse. They're talking instead about a great leap forward in the way our conscious minds interface with space and time. So not an end of the world, but an end to the antiquated ways of our current world. 20 years ago, I was a guy with an unusual idea in the middle of the Canadian prairies. Now I'm a guy with an idea that millions of other people around the world have seen and enjoyed, and which more and more people are becoming convinced is not crazy at all, and may just be the truth about the nature of our reality. Perhaps most amazingly, all of this happened with almost no advertising or promotion, just through the power of shared ideas in our modern hyper-connected world. How cool is that? I'd like to finish this show off today with a song about hope for the future, and it's called See No Future. This is Rob Bryanton. Thanks from Imagining the 10th Dimension.